who we are, what we believe we are in the context of our everyday lives, um, influences us. And I did not know about your husband from you. Somebody else told me years ago. And you always had such a beautiful smile on your face.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. I can only imagine behind that smile is a swirl of other emotions that you might experience every single day.
Hmm.
And I'm just hoping that maybe we can unpack that a little bit because people usually, as you're aware, don't know what to do when hell happens, and
Yeah.
we don't know what to say. And then all those feelings that are coming at us, what is normal, what is not normal, and then how does the influence of people, time, and belief, how does it help? Does it change? All of those things. So that's a lot,
Sure.
and you can take it as you want. So you're Rachel Hill, and I'll let you take it from there.
So you just want me to introduce myself a little bit and a little bit of my story?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, please. Yep.
Yeah. So yes, my name is Rachel.
Hmm.
I mean, where do I begin? Um, let's see. I enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school.
Hmm.
Um, I moved halfway through my junior year of high school from a really big school in Indianapolis to a small town in Ohio. Um,
Oh.
and when we moved, I felt like my rug kind of got pulled out from under me, and my future plans shifted a little bit, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So
Mm.
I come from a military family, so I
Mm.
decided to enlist in the Air Force. And while in tech school, where we learn our jobs, I
Mhm.
met my husband. We did the long distance thing. My first assignment was in Guam, and he was sent to Alaska. So we were long, very long distance across the international date line.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, we got married April 1st of 1999 at 19 years old.
My
And
gosh,
right,
Rachel.
right.
Right,
I see my
right.
oldest son is 19, and I'm like, oh man,
That's too young.
right. But
Right.
yeah, so we got married, and I was transferred to Alaska. Um, we both started going to college and working towards commissioning programs.
Oh, okay.
So I have a bachelor's degree in Russian, actually.
In Russian.
In Russian, yep. Pursuing, I was going to be a linguist in the Air Force.
Okay.
He was a maintainer on the F-15s when he was enlisted, and
Hmm.
then he decided he wanted to be a pilot. So
Okay.
um, he got accepted into an early release program. They let him out of his enlisted commitment to go to ROTC full time. He ended up commissioning through the University of Alaska Anchorage and got
Okay.
a pilot slot. So I decided to separate from the Air Force in order to follow him and support his
Sure.
career. Because as a Russian linguist and a pilot, I knew that we would have a really hard time being stationed together.
Yeah.
So I got out. I mean, the timing couldn't have worked out any more perfectly. So I got out
Mm.
as he was transferring to Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. So we went down
That's a
there.
big
He
change.
flew T6s in the first phase of training, and then we went to Columbus, Mississippi, where he finished pilot training. And from there, he was what we call FAPed, first assignment instructor pilot. So he stayed in as an instructor for 4 years. Um, we had both of our kids there, and um, it was a very interesting assignment because after he finished instructor training, he was diagnosed with a chronic medical condition. Where they
Mm.
came in and they told him, "You'll never fly again, and you're probably going to get kicked out of the Air Force."
Oh.
Yep. So
Oh.
he actually fought that for a really long time. Found a really amazing flight doc that I'm still in contact with today,
Oh my.
um, who helped him fight, and eventually they got him back on flying status.
Okay.
Um, and he fought for an assignment because they weren't going to let him go to the operational Air Force. They were going to keep him as an instructor for the rest of his career. Um,
Okay.
fought that, eventually got him back into an operational status. Reached
Mm-hmm.
out to one of his closest mentors, who happened to be the wing commander up at Elmendorf in Alaska, and said, "Hey, I would love to come fly C-17s for you." And eventually got his dream assignment flying C-17s in Alaska.
Oh
So
my.
off we went to Alaska with two little boys in tow,
Oh my.
and our first 2 years there were amazing. All he ever wanted to do was go back to Alaska. So we were going camping and fishing and four wheeling and all the things. Um,
That
yeah,
you would
just
do in Alaska. Oh
yeah,
my.
just
I've seen some of the pictures, Rachel, and I've heard Alaska's beautiful.
it
Um,
is. It is. It's
okay.
amazing.
Okay.
Yeah. So
It's
we were there for
so,
2 years.
uh-huh.
And then the summer of 2010, my oldest turned 5 in June,
Mm,
and July 25th, my youngest turned 3, and July 28th, so 3 days later, um, Jeff went to work like normal. He
mhm,
called me about 5:30 saying they were stepping to fly. Um, and he said, "We're just going to knock it out real quick and I'll be home after dinner."
mm.
I told him I loved him and to fly safe. And about an hour later, I found out that their C-17 went down, and it killing all four crew members on board. And that started a sorry, just going back
No.
to that day, always some
Yeah.
tears. But it started a journey that I never thought that I would be on. So I was 31 years
Mm,
old, and I went from a military spouse to a military widow
mm.
with 3 and 5 year old little boys.
Uh, I can't imagine because you're both at the pinnacle of your life.
Yeah,
Early 30s, you're starting to get it together. You know what your trajectory is. Family started.
yeah,
And I suppose it'd be the farthest thing from your mind.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
then they show up. In the military, there's usually a three or four, two or four individuals that'll show up on somebody's door.
Hmm.
Did people come and knock on your door? Did you get a phone call?
So it was a really unique situation because it was a local
Mm,
training accident. Um,
okay.
so, and they were also training for an air show. Um, the air show was
Oh,
happening that weekend, and this was Wednesday before they were doing their last
mm,
practice flight. So it was on the news before I even knew it had happened.
okay.
Um, so I immediately, and at first we didn't know which jet it was.
Mm,
Nobody really knew if it was the airshow jet per se. Um, but once we found out, I just had a feeling. But
mm,
friends started texting me, trying to be discreet. I had my foot was in a boot, so they were trying to be discreet, saying, "Hey, are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" Was the first friend that texted.
mm,
But actually, before that, I got a phone call from another spouse whose husband was on that flight also. She
mm,
had gotten a call from her brother who was working air traffic control. And when he called her, he asked where her husband was. And she said, "Oh, he's out flying. Why? What's going on?"
mm,
And he said, "We just lost a C-17." So she called me
mm,
saying, "I don't know what to do. Do you have anyone you can call?" Um,
mm.
I said, "Yes, let me see what I can find out." So I started making calls. And of course, nobody could tell me anything.
No.
But, um, but other spouses in the squadron started reaching out. I had 10, 15 friends at my house within
Mm,
20 minutes. But I did get a call from the squadron about an hour later. It was the commander of the squadron. Um,
mm,
and he said, "Jeff's been involved in an accident. Um, but we don't know anything because the scene is still unsafe."
mm,
And the thing is, the active duty part of it didn't follow protocol, which I am extremely grateful for. They
Mm.
knew that I knew.
Oh,
And so
sure.
they wanted to reach out right away. And when he called, he said, I'm coming to your house with my wife, the director of operations with his wife, the other director of operations with his wife, and the first sergeant. I remember asking if they were bringing a chaplain, and he said yes. So they came to my house
Hmm.
before there was official word, which again isn't normal,
Hmm.
but I am really grateful that they did because otherwise I would have just been sitting there wondering what was going on. And,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
The military protocol, because dying in the military is known and part of serving in the military. So we have this very well established
mhm,
procedure that you're talking about. But at the same time, when you're on the inside, it's a different relationship that you have with that protocol. And it's
right.
just sometimes I think it's unfortunate that we have the media that can be the first informer of something so
Yeah.
life changing and tragic.
Yeah.
Uh,
When
and
I remember calling, I mean, I hung up with, whoever I could talk to. And the first thing I did was call my mom because that's what we
mhm,
do, right? We call our mom,
yeah, yep,
even though she was thousands of miles away in Minnesota.
yeah,
Um, and oh, this one brings tears. I remember telling her my worst fear has come true, that his plane crashed. And
yeah,
she asked if there was someone who could come sit with me or take the
mm,
boys because they were home with me. And she had my dad call my neighbor at the same time I was on the phone with her.
mhm,
And I remember my neighbor telling me she had literally just seen it on the news when my dad
mm,
called and asked her to come to my house. That's how
okay.
quick everything happened. It was crazy. It was
It
crazy.
sounds crazy. What year was this, Rachel?
2010.
Okay.
So we just had the 14th angelversary, as we call it.
Hmm. And you went to Alaska, and do you do that every year?
We do.
Do you?
Yep, we go every year for the anniversary.
Okay. And then what year did you start the foundation, Jeff Hill Foundation?
I think we officially started it in 2012, but things
Okay.
kind of started in motion in 2011. Yeah.
And then what do you do with that foundation?
So it's called the Jeff Hill Legacy Fund,
Mm-hmm.
and we give educational scholarships to Air Force ROTC cadets. So
Oh.
it started as one of the cadre from his ROTC detachment. She said, "Hey, what do you think about starting a scholarship fund here at the University of
Mm-hmm.
Alaska Anchorage?" And I thought it was a really great idea. Um, and we kind of took it and expanded on it. Um, his main focus was always about taking care of people, the people who worked
Jeff's.
for him. Jeff's, yes.
Okay.
People who worked for him or his family or his friends. I mean, when I talk to cadets about him, I try to
Mm-hmm.
share fun stories. And one fun story that I like to share is when we went fishing with some friends,
Mm-hmm.
and she happened to fall in the river in Alaska, which is freezing cold. And so he pulled out his survival pack and he made her this tent and had sterno in there so she would be warm. And he was so excited
Um,
to use his survival kit for her. But he was just always about making sure everyone was taken care of. And we thought, what better way than to provide,
uh,
educational assistance for some of these young kids who are going through college and getting ready to serve their country as officers in the Air Force. So, yeah.
that's very thoughtful. So then you and your kids go up to Alaska every year on the anniversary of his death and remember him and talk to individuals and then raise funds. Is that right?
Sometimes we have
Oh,
various
okay.
events. We did have an event this year. We have a beer tasting and silent auction. Um,
Okay.
so we brought that back this year in Alaska. A couple years ago, we did a golf tournament. Um, but yeah, we usually have a couple different events through the year to raise
Mm.
funds.
Mm.
But
It was that what initially attracted you to Jeff? I mean, just going back to I know that you had a short courtship, um, and it sounds like he was a protector, a strong
yeah.
protector.
Hmm.
And is are those some of the qualities that attracted you to him?
Absolutely. And he was
Yeah.
very handsome. And he was a big guy. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there was definitely a feeling of, I always felt safe and
Mm.
secure and protected. And, um, yeah, yeah, that
Those
was
are
definitely one of the qualities that attracted me to him.
and so his legacy and the foundation, of course, would be to help others and that protective piece.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. It's harder. Is it harder as the years go by, or is it still as fresh as it ever has been?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Mm.
Um, when we do these events, like we have
Mm-hmm.
a beer tasting and silent auction coming up here in Minnesota. It usually takes me about 2 weeks to recover from these big events. Um,
Oh.
I'm not a naturally extroverted person, so having to talk to
Mm.
everybody is naturally hard for me. Um,
Yeah.
but it also brings an emotional piece where
Mm-hmm.
remembering Jeff and talking about Jeff and um, yeah, sometimes it feels like yesterday and I can share stories and I can see them like they were yesterday, but yet other
Mm.
times I struggle to hear his voice like I used to.
Oh, sure.
Or I look at my kids and I see how much they have grown and developed in the
Mm-hmm.
past 14 years. I mean, they were 3 and 5 and they're now 19 and 17, getting ready to go to college, my youngest.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, looking at them, you can see how much time has passed. But yet, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it just kind of depends. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times not
Yeah.
so much.
What did having to share your husband with other people, like in the foundation, um, were you used to having to share him with the military? Um, you know what I'm getting at? Like, he's your husband. He was your future. You were so intimate with each other
Mhm.
in many details and compromised conversations. And now part of the legacy piece is you're having to share who he was and who he continues to be and how he influences people. Was that a difficult transition for you or was it natural?
I honestly think it was pretty natural. Um, and yeah, I mean, the military lifestyle, especially the heavy, like the big plane, cargo plane
Mm,
lifestyle is not an easy one. And yet you have to share them a lot because he would leave
mm.
for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, literally
Oh,
flying around the world.
okay.
Come back for a week or two, and then he'd be off again on some kind of mission. So, um, yeah, in that sense, it was a constant gone home, gone home. But I think
Hmm.
I don't know when it came to this, Jeff Hill Legacy Fund. I was just
Hmm.
excited to talk about him. Any
Hmm.
opportunity to talk about him,
Hmm.
absolutely, I'm all in. Let me say his name and share his story and his legacy. And one of my favorite quotes, I use it a lot, but it
Uh-huh.
talks about how someone dies twice. Once when your body physically
Mm.
stops breathing, and a second when someone says your name for the last time.
Hmm.
And so every event we have, every time I give scholarships, I always say thank you for saying his name because that's what keeps him going. And
Hmm.
yeah, like I said, anytime I get to talk about him and say his name and share his story. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
Um, it's something that we learn, isn't it? That they continue to live within us and externally too, in so many regards. And then so people learning how to deal with that or how to interact with that. Is it past tense? Is it present tense?
Hmm.
Is it future tense?
Yeah.
And what do we do with the non tangible aspects of Jeff?
Hmm.
His spirit, and that interaction that we can have, and with the
And I,
legacy.
and I think from day one, I really tried to make it known that he is not a taboo subject. Like like
Mm,
even the night of the accident, I had probably 20 people at my house,
mm-hmm,
and we were sitting in the living room talking about him, and we were sharing stories and laughing and joking. I remember some really really close friends of ours. We had been friends since 2000. So at this point, 24, 25 years
mm-hmm,
ago we was when we met. Their middle son came over to my house that night, and he wrote a paper about it for a class in college, and in the paper he said, on my way over there I wasn't sure what to expect. Like, is everybody just going to be sitting around quiet and crying?
mm-hmm,
And he was surprised to find that when he walked in we were smiling and laughing, um and I think that is the tone that I have tried to set this whole time is, let's remember him. Now, don't get me wrong. I also will talk about how he drove me crazy and, that type of thing. But
uh-huh,
let's talk about him. Let's not pretend he never existed. He was an
mm,
amazing human being, and it's okay to
mm-hmm,
talk, and it's okay to share stories. And I know sometimes people are afraid to bring up the people that we love that aren't here
mm-hmm,
anymore.
mm-hmm,
And I've had people say, "Oh, I don't want to make you sad." It's already sad. I'm already sad. So
mm-hmm.
let's talk about the good things. Let's remember him. So I
Right.
think that's a big part of it. And like I said, I've tried to set that tone since the night that he died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we choose to carry and we choose to evidence, um, our attitude, if you will. It sounds like, just listening to you, that you and Jeff were a strong team. There's discussions on who does what role,
Hmm.
and an open conversation, it sounds like, and also an understanding, and then a decision to support each other in those roles you decided to pursue.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That comes out in your conversations today. You're on I think it's YouTube in different regards.
Hmm.
And so we're going to put links, in this description if people want to link into that, to Jeff Hill's Legacy Foundation. And then I know that you spoke at your church.
My parents.
Beautiful. And so if we could switch more into how, what you believe about who you are in this world, and death, and has it helped you? Has it changed? Does it continue to inform you and walk with you?
Okay. Is that a question?
Kinda. Yes, and because you had a faith belief system that you grew up in, and has it maintained its relationship with you, and has it been helpful for you?
Yeah. Um, and I think my answer is yes to all of your questions.
Okay.
Um, I grew up going to church,
Mm,
but I felt like I did all the things that I was supposed to do, but I don't know if I necessarily understood what my faith was until he died, if that makes any
mm,
sense.
mm.
Um, and what I talked about when I spoke at my parents' church, I shared my faith journey in their Lenten one of their Lenten
Yeah.
services, and one of the things I talked about was I think that in situations where we lose a loved one like that, you either kind of cling to your faith or you push it
Mm-hmm.
away. And
Mm-hmm.
I found myself clinging to a faith that I didn't even know that I necessarily had. Um, and I think right from the get go, I believed that things happen for a reason. And I hate that phrase. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people would say it to me, and I would internally roll my eyes. And my response internally would be, well, it's easy for you to say it wasn't your husband in that airplane.
Right.
Yeah, you can say that everything happens for a reason because you're not the one going through it. But I also believe that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt like I had to believe that, and I had to believe there was a bigger purpose. Otherwise, what's the sense? What's the sense of
Right.
it, right? Um, and yeah, I started doing a lot of um, really deep thinking and research and
Mm-hmm.
reading, and um, I think it has definitely solidified my faith and the belief in heaven and what heaven is. Yeah.
Yeah. So often, humans, for some reason, we don't unpack what we believe about the things that we can't control, about the things that are in the future, or how they impact us until there is a crisis.
Hmm.
Then they become very, very important. And I know we can look back, 9/11 was a very spiritual time for the whole country. And what surfaces for some reason, that community piece, because you talked like internally, people showed up at your door, and people that you knew, they weren't strangers,
Hmm.
and they wanted to be with you, that sense of connection. And then the existential piece, you know, who is Jeff? Who was he before was he anyone before this world? Was he a creation? Was he an accident? Who is he now? Does he exist in another form? Those conversations we can talk about way out there, or the ivory tower theologians or what have you, but they become real.
Hmm. Right.
I've said, yeah, those are the discussions that you have in grief groups.
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever were supported in a grief group or not, but those existential questions become real.
Oh yeah. When they became very real, especially with my kids.
Oh,
Um, and I remember, so I had his urn. He was cremated. I had his
okay.
urn sitting on my dresser for about 5 months before he was buried at Arlington National
Uh
Cemetery
huh.
in DC. And I was waiting for the day that my kids asked me, how did daddy get into such a small box?
Oh.
And I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to tell my kids that, I mean, for lack of better words, we burned your dad? Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
How do you
Yes.
explain that? And I have always been very open with my kids, age
Mm.
appropriate, of course. And there
Mm-hmm.
came a time where they were both sitting with me in my bedroom, and we were talking about him, and one of them asked, how did daddy get into that small box?
Mm-hmm.
I explained he was cremated. I did, in fact, tell them what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but, oh, this could make me cry.
Mm.
But he had already left his body. He didn't feel
Yeah.
it. And we talked about how he was and is all around us.
Mm-hmm.
When he died, he wasn't in that body anymore. So he didn't feel it,
Right.
but he's around us. And I was kind of surprised at how they just said okay, and they understood, and they were like, "Oh yeah, cool." And it wasn't really a difficult conversation.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
Yeah. What do you do with the physical and the non-physical? And thank God for kids who don't have to control the outcome. They're
yeah.
just very accepting, aren't they? It sounds like they were. Yeah. Like, oh, okay. All right, I get it.
Yeah.
And for you, who has supported you? And has it changed over the years? You know?
Um, it's kind of changed, but it's also stayed very constant. I mean, I feel extremely blessed that we have a very large and incredible support system.
Mm,
Um, we have, well, first of all, my kids. I feel like the three of us, we have a really special bond that
mm-hmm,
most families don't have. I mean, obviously, we went through a very traumatic event, and even though they were little, we've grown up
mm-hmm,
with that. We've been open about it. We talk about it. My parents, my sister, um, but our Air Force family has been a huge support system. Um, and what I found was it wasn't even just the people in the squadron at the time, it was also the
mm-hmm,
next group of people that came in. And all the way through to the people that are there now. We were just in
mm-hmm,
Alaska. They still do roll call every year. Um,
mm-hmm,
and if you're not familiar with that, with what that is, it's a World War II tradition, I believe, where they would come back from flying missions and they would go through their roll call. And if somebody didn't answer, they assumed that they had been lost. Um,
mm-hmm,
and they'll say their name three times, and after the third time, they ring a bell and they have a toast. And um, so this past year on Sitka 4-3 Day, which was their call sign,
mm-hmm,
I spoke to the squadron a little bit and talked about Jeff and what it is from a personal standpoint. Everybody went out to the crash site and they did roll call. So, the people that were there at the time, the people that came in later are now all across the country. We're still in contact with a lot of them. We see them every time we travel. Um,
mm-hmm,
and even my community here in Minnesota, they never met Jeff, but
right.
they have been a huge support system, not just by coming to our events, but
Mm-hmm,
by supporting us on those difficult days. And yeah, and now the
mm-hmm.
Legion family, as people find out. um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I feel extremely blessed for sure.
The military and then organizations such as we both belong to the American Legion, the Department of Minnesota, and then our respective posts, of course. The military is one of the disciplines or jobs or careers that forces you to think about what your life means and what you're going to live for.
Hmm.
And it sounds like Jeff was able to live for and knew what he would die for.
Yeah, for sure.
And that it frames it gives you your left and your right boundary to a large degree and helps you focus in on what you're going to live for
Hmm.
because you decided this is I'm willing to die for this or these people.
Yeah,
And the military is the place where you have those hard ruminations, if you will. And you both were in the military, so you both probably had those discussions.
we
This
did.
is how we're okay.
We did, yeah. And I think the first one was when he deployed to Saudi Arabia in
Hmm.
2000. We were young and newly married, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, and when you're going through those deployment lines and you're talking to um, legal and creating your will,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but that kind of puts your mortality in your face.
Yeah, the front and center piece.
Hmm.
I know the chaplains are also part of that line, and people have the opportunity to speak with individuals, to have those questions about uh, what I'm deciding to live and give up my life for if that happens. Um,
Absolutely.
Not everybody, of course, has the opportunity to decide that because accidents happen, um, traumas happen each and every single day. Has it helped you knowing that he was doing what he wanted to do and lived to do? You know, was there a certain element of control in there for him?
Um, it's really interesting you bring that up because we had a
Mm,
conversation about 2 days before. We were watching a show on TV, and there was a guy who had died base jumping,
mm,
and um, I remember they were interviewing his sister, and she said,
mhm,
"Oh, but he died doing something that he loved." And I have no idea why, but I turned to Jeff and I said, "Would that be the case for you? Like, meaning
mm,
if you died in a plane crash? Like, who
mhm,
asks that?"
mm,
um, but even crazier is that he responded. Like, who answers that question? Um,
mm,
and he thought about it for a second, and he said, flying for me is like going to the gym for you, because I'm also a group fitness instructor.
okay.
And he said, you don't really want to go, because it's a lot of work and takes a lot of effort, but you have fun while you're there, you enjoy what
Mhm,
you're doing and who you're with, and you feel good afterwards.
mm,
He said that's what flying is for me. And I can't think of a better response.
mm,
And yeah, that brings me comfort in terms of just the specific flying.
mhm,
Um, Thinking of the military as a whole, there was a
mhm,
point where he was thinking of getting out. He
mhm,
It was at the height of when he wasn't allowed to fly. He wasn't, and he was told he was going to be kicked out anyway. They offered the voluntary separation incentive where they would pay you to get out.
mhm.
We went back and forth, and he ended up applying and then was denied that too.
Oh,
And
goodness.
it came back, and they said, "Oh, we didn't realize this was that person. If you apply again, we'll approve it."
Oh,
And we actually took it as a sign from God
mhm,
that
mhm,
that wasn't meant to be, and so he stayed in and continued to push. Um, and I am so grateful for that decision, because had
mm,
he died in a different capacity, we wouldn't have the support system that we have
mm,
now.
mhm,
And if he knew that that's what we would have, you know what I mean? I
mhm,
think that would bring him
mhm,
comfort too. Does it? If that makes
mhm.
sense,
Yes.
knowing that we're taken care of.
Yes, and it sounds like there were these serendipitous events that happened between you and him
Yeah.
that were unplanned, unscripted, that you can't really, explain why,
Hmm.
but
I call
they're
them God
part
wink.
of. Yes, yeah. I like that you call them the God winks, because there are we have to have control, and we struggle with the mysteries or the things that happen in our lives that happen outside of our control. And so God has a way for, if you're able to see that, are willing to see that, or want to see that, to
That's
remind
good.
us that there's so much that's beyond us.
I like to explain them as those moments where you shrug your shoulders and say, "Oh, well, that's coincidence." I don't
Hmm.
believe in coincidences. I believe those are God winks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
You
So
were
thank
talking
you.
about the chaplains from
Uh-huh.
deployment lines and whatnot, and one of my favorite
Hmm.
stories um, is about a chaplain. Um,
Mm.
when they called and said they were coming to our house that night, and I asked if they were bringing a chaplain. I honestly
Hmm.
don't know why I asked. Um, but I had worked in the chapel when we were stationed in Columbus, Mississippi. I
Hmm.
played piano for all of the worship services, and I was the accountant at the chapel. So I knew all of the chaplains there really well.
Uh-huh.
And when we got to Alaska fairly early on, they wanted the spouses to fill out this form that said, is there someone that you would want to notify you, someone you wouldn't want to notify you? Is there a chaplain you want? And I remember
Mm-hmm.
looking at that thinking, I don't know any of the chaplains here. This is stupid. And I didn't fill it out. I threw it away.
Okay.
And so when they said yes, they were bringing a chaplain, um, I don't think I thought two thoughts about it, but
Mm-hmm.
they showed up at my house and the commander was talking to me, and I looked over at the chaplain and I looked at
Mm-hmm.
his name tag and I said, you look familiar. And I said, I know you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you did our marriage counseling 10 years ago at Elmendorf in Alaska. And I knew him really well because I worked in
Oh my.
finance. And so I was on all of those deployment lines, and he did a lot of the deployment lines as a chaplain as well. So there would be many exercises where he and I would be sitting, at the PAX terminal from the 10 to 4 a.m. shift. And yeah, so on
That he was stable. Yeah.
on the worst night of my life, this chaplain from our past came walking into my living room.
And what are the chances of that
Yeah.
happening? Right?
And it's actually really cool hearing it from his side as well. And he's written
Mm.
stories about it. There was just an article that he wrote for his local newspaper, but um, he explains it as he was the wing chaplain. So he was the head chaplain that probably should have
Mm-hmm.
stayed in the office. There was a lot to do,
Yeah.
a lot of paperwork and a lot of organizing. And when Jeff's squadron commander called and said, "We need a chaplain right now because we're going to their house,"
Mm-hmm.
um, he was like, "There's nobody here. I'm the only one here." And he said on the whole way there, he was thinking to himself, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't be the one coming to the house. I should be staying
Mm.
back. I have all these things I need to do." Until he walked into my living room and I said, "I know you." And he was like, "Oh, this is where I'm supposed to be." Yeah.
Another level of comfort.
Absolutely. And we sat I went and got his business card. I had to show him from my scrapbook. And we sat on the couch and chatted about, where we had been over the past 10 years. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just like catching up with an old friend. And it brought, yeah, comfort
Comfort.
to a very traumatic situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't
I can't
imagine.
imagine having someone different. But yeah, and we're still
Mm.
in contact with him today, too.
Oh my.
He
Rachel,
doesn't live very far away.
can I switch the subject a little bit on you, Rachel? Um, because we're here talking about your husband. The reason we're on this podcast is to talk about your husband. Um, Sometimes the spouse gets lost. And I'm wondering, how have you maintained who you are?
Oh, that's hard. Um,
Mm,
and there have been multiple times where I feel like I've lost who I am.
mm,
Um, we stayed in Alaska for 4 years after his death.
uh-huh,
And part of the reason we moved is because I kind of felt like that was my identity, that I was his
mm,
widow, and that was it.
mhm, mhm,
So when we moved to Minnesota, I felt like I was able to kind of explore who I am again.
mm, mm,
Um, it's been hard, but I think it's hard for anyone. I mean, with my youngest now getting ready to go to college in a year,
mhm,
and I'll
mhm,
be an empty nester and on my own. I don't know what I'm
mhm.
gonna do. I mean, most of my
Right.
time is spent at my kids' activities and helping out and volunteering. And what am I gonna do next? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's been a challenge.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure how to answer that question.
Well, and you don't have to, do you?
Yeah.
Because being aware that these, your identity and then your purpose, they're always transforming, aren't they?
Yeah.
Um, with your husband, there's also that emotional connection piece.
Hmm.
And then there's roles and there's companionship. And all of that transforms and changes every year, every day.
Right.
Being aware of it is a really good thing
I
to
will
say,
say,
yeah. Uh
um,
huh.
one thing, it was actually, I found it a little difficult when I joined the Legion and started working at department headquarters.
Uh
All of
huh.
a sudden, it was about my service because I was the Legionnaire.
Okay.
And that is the first time that my service had ever been in the forefront. Um,
Oh,
and I wasn't sure how to handle that or how to work with it. It, I still actually struggle with it. Yeah.
did you ever consider yourself a veteran?
I mean, yeah, but my service kind of gets brushed under the rug because
Mm-hmm.
his is
Mm-hmm.
up here, you know. So,
Right.
and it's not a bad thing. I'm not complaining. I just
Right.
um it kind of threw me for a loop when all of a sudden, I was the one and it was my service that was talked
They
about.
saw you differently. They saw you as Rachel Hill, a veteran,
Yeah, rather than
not necessarily Rachel Hill's or Jeff's widow.
hmm. Yeah,
And then how do you put those two identities together under your umbrella?
right,
Mm,
right.
yeah. And the the widow has always assumed to be the woman too,
Hmm.
to a large percentage. It's over 90% or even over 80%. And then for you, also then as a veteran, then the woman veteran.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because that's part of the mix too.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of, okay, how am I supposed to act? And I can only act the way I feel. Am I in, can I do that?
Hmm. Yeah.
Those are struggles. And so you're going to continue to support your husband, your not your husband, your sons. One's going off to college and the other one's facing a life-changing experience as a senior and then probably going off to college maybe or maybe
Hmm.
not, who knows.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. That's the plan. Yep. So my oldest will be a sophomore at Ohio State.
Oh, he's a sophomore. Okay.
Yeah, he'll be a sophomore, and then my youngest was a senior in high school. Yeah,
Okay. Goodness
and
gracious.
they're both looking to serve in the Air Force.
What do you think of that?
I think it's fantastic. I'm a little biased. Yeah, my oldest is on a full ROTC scholarship, so he's been doing
Oh,
ROTC. And he wants to be a doctor, and my younger
okay.
one wants to be a pilot. And I get asked a lot how I feel about that one.
Sure.
And I I think it's fantastic as long as that's what he wants to do and not
Mm-hmm.
something he feels like he should do because he needs to follow in his
Mm-hmm.
dad's footsteps.
Yeah, I hear ya. And the whole piece of what you can control and living within your passion and how you feel that you're hardwired to live for and serve, and then
Right.
that greater purpose. Yeah.
Right. And there
And
was a
then what
point
do
that my oldest said to me, he's like, I don't know if he had already received the scholarship and he said, I don't know if I want to serve in the military. And I said,
mm,
that's fine. You don't have to. Don't
yeah.
do it because you feel like you need to. Um, you have a scholarship where you have 1 year where there's no commitment. Just try it. See
Mm,
what you think. And he ended
mm-hmm.
up loving it and is continuing.
Mm,
So I mean, and I'm not pushing it on them by any means. If they want to,
mm-hmm.
awesome. I think it's great. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of really great benefits. It can be a difficult life, but there's a lot of really great things that come with it too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if they choose not to, that's okay too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We we have a inner, I guess sometimes I get caught up in saying things that are in my brain. But you have a sense of purpose within you that as you're a young person, you're learning to own and struggle with. in America, we have a tendency to think that our minds determine to a large degree our purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And we've forgotten about that soul piece where we are fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different for everybody. And to a large degree, I think in the spiritual world, we're only truly fulfilled when we're serving another human being.
Yeah.
And what that looks like, to a large degree, does involve sacrifice, if it's your time, if it's enjoying golf on a Sunday or what have you, that duty piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also biased because I'm military, so it's hardwired into me.
Right.
But I haven't really come across any major religion where they define love as a hedonistic activity. You know,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
if yeah, if you ascribe to a faith, there's always selflessness, there's always service, there's compassion, um, there is suffering, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's always community. And so
Yeah.
it's always hard. Thank you for your time and your willingness. I'd like to give the people that are willing to give up some of their time the last word, if you will. And is there anything that you would like to share with us?
Um, I think more than anything, just thank you for the opportunity to say his name. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Like I said,
welcome.
any opportunity to talk about him and share his story and our story and his name is something I will always jump on.
And Jeff Hill's Legacy Foundation will be in the link for anyone who wants to check into it and possibly donate. So thanks,
And we have an
Rachel.
event coming up on September 21st in Elk River.
What happens then?
Well, it's a beer tasting and silent auction. So tickets will be available online soon. But yeah, it's just a fun night to um, have some fellowship and remember Jeff and raise money for these scholarships.
And it's in Elk River. Where's it going to be at on September 21st?
Yep, at ERX, right off of
ER.
ERX. Yep, Extreme Motor Park. Yep.
I'm in southern Minnesota, so I have no idea. So ERX on September 21st, the Jeff Hill Legacy Foundation raising money to support those that are pursuing a passion in the Air Force as pilots.
Nope, they don't have to be pilots. Just
They don't have.
nope. Air Force, our current Air Force ROTC cadets. So,
Okay.
and one of our requirements is they just have an intent to serve as officers in the Air Force. So yeah, no, they don't have to be
Okay.
pilots. They can be any career field. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks.